Give it 2 seconds. Got it. And that's just setting up there. Okay. Which way is the camera pointing? There's you three. And then copy. The wonders of technology. Thank you for being patient. Aha. Okay, so our online audience can now see and hear us. And full screen. There's that. I'm going to recover the mouse. If anyone wants to sit in the front row. And the chat is, yeah, you are it. It's all yours.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to our in-person and our digital audience. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Catalina Watt. I am Literature Officer at Creative Scotland. I'm also a writer and audio director at Quarry Magazine. And I am absolutely delighted to be joined today by Gray, Rachel and Eamon, who is on the screen behind us there. So I'm just going to quickly read the bios of our wonderful speakers tonight, and then we're going to start off by kind of getting them to talk a little bit about their books tonight, and then we're going to be treated to some readings, and then we're going to get into a little discussion about the themes of their work, about folklore, about queering folklore, and then at the end we're going to move to an audience Q&A, but don't worry, I will warn you when we're about to move into that before my last question, so you'll have a bit of time to think about anything you want to ask our speakers. So, to start, just making sure I've got everybody's bios. Aidan Wildsmith is a queer, non-binary and autistic artist and writer living in Devon. They have been writing and making art for most of their life. This is their first book, TM, but they have made several zines that they're proud of. They have a deep, undying love of folklore, magic, nature, and spooky stories. One time when they were a kid, they thought they saw a golden phoenix. They probably didn't, but that kind of thing sticks with a person, you know? They consider William Shakespeare and Vine to have had equal influence on their life and work. On the one hand, you've got Macbeth, but on the other, there's Sir Dude.
Ah, dude.
Not online, love this. So pretty much why. When they're not making old folk stories gay, they can often be found taking pictures of trees, listening to Christine and the Queens on repeat, making friends with wild animals, looking in the mirror and going, "You've got this, babe," staring longingly at the horizon and making straights embarrassed. Welcome, Eamon. That's amazing bios.
I'm following.
Gray Crosby is a queer writer and spoken word poet. Their writing often explores themes such as queerness, gender, and mental health, and has been published in a wide range of anthologies and journals throughout the UK, and is poetry filmed on BBC The Social. They perform regularly at literary events and cabaret nights around Scotland, with their full-length spoken word show Amphibious premiering at the Edinburgh Fringe in 2019. They live in Glasgow with their soon-to-be wife and their rescue dog, Boomy. Welcome, Gray. I was like, I don't know if this is a mess up. So okay, so
we actually got married over there, like literally just the top of the shop. Yeah, married here. It's lovely.
Oh, that's so sweet. And last but certainly not least, we have Rachel Plummer. Okay. Rachel Plummer is a poet living in Edinburgh. She is the Scottish Book Trust's New Writers Award winner in 2016 and has won or placed in numerous other awards and competitions, including the Troubadour Prize, the Flambeau Prize, the Penfro, and Canterbury Festival's Poet of the Year Award. Her poetry has appeared in magazines including The Dark Horse, Dyslexia, Agenda, Interpreter's House, Gutter, and New Walk, and anthologies including New Writing Scotland, the Emma Press Anthology of Love, and 154 from Live Canon, an anthology of contemporary responses to Shakespeare's sonnets. In 2017, she published a pamphlet of sci-fi poetry with House Press and received a cultural commission from LGBT Youth Scotland to write the poems that appear in Wayne. She runs creative writing workshops for children and teens. She has 2 children, 3 guinea pigs, and entirely too many books. Welcome, Rachel. So these are our wonderful speakers that we're joined with tonight. I wonder if we could just kind of quickly go around and each of you could introduce kind of your work and what your sort of creative practice is about, and then we'll have some readings. I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe Avon, you can start.
Sure, okay.
Can everyone hear? Okay.
Yeah, can everyone hear me? Okay, good. My work in creative practice. Mostly I'm very interested in writing about folklore, of course. I'm interested in writing about the natural world and the way in which we interact with it through our imagination and how that connects with folklore. Very interested in mystery. I don't know what else to say.
What's
Haven't
Tamlin
covered-
about?
What's Tamlin about?
Yeah.
What, the themes of Tamlin?
Or even just a sort of a wee plot summary, like what would you tell our fair audience to kind of encourage them to pick up a copy of the book tonight?
Okay, so Tamlin is an adaptation of an old folk story from Scotland. Tells the story of Janet, who finds the mysterious figure of Tamlin in the woods one night and learns that she is trapped in the fairy realm, and unable to love freely. And they fall in love, and Janet decides to step forward and break the spell that's binding Tamlin. And yeah, sorry, I'm not good at this. I don't know what else to say.
No, that's. I mean, to find out more, you're gonna just have to read the book. And Grace, you want to go next?
Yeah, so so my big pamphlet is, I usually say it's a really tiny book, really tiny stories, which all gives a really tiny description. But it's very much that, yeah. So they're mostly all quite strange and weird love stories in some form or another. Yeah, I used to write flash fiction a lot, mainly because I thought I couldn't do poetry. So now I would probably class myself as a poet more than anything, and so most of my writing time doing poetry. But yeah, no, I like writing in very concise forms, very
And Rachel?
My book Wayne, it's a book of LGBT retellings of Scottish folklore. They're poems and they're beautifully illustrated by Helena Boppert, who's an amazing artist. She's just the amazing thing about writing works for younger people, the same that young people, is that you get your poems with pictures. But yeah, it's Scottish folklore, and I started my daughter really loves Scottish folklore, and I was telling stories to her, and I would gender swap some of the characters and what was happening in the stories to make it more like our family or more like our friends' families and people we know. And it sort of struck me at one point that maybe other people might like to read that too. So that's where it started.
Oh, well, thank you all three of you, and we are so treated because all of these books are so beautiful and they all have illustrations, and obviously Tamlin is a graphic novel, and it was such a treat to read them and also to kind of devour the art as I was trying poems and stories. So now that we've kind of got a little bit of what the work is about, I wonder if we could be persuaded to have some readings. Okay, everyone's like, I really don't want to go first. Maybe we'll start with Avon again. Do you want to do a little excerpt?
Yeah, okay. I'll read a bit from Tamlin then. So this is just when Janet has just first met Tamlin, and she's very fearful of her because in my version she kind of has the appearance of a ghost rather than in the original where she's like a solid person. But so Tamlin starts speaking. "I know you fear me," Tamlin said, "but I am not a ghost. I am a living woman. You cannot fear from me the magic of the spirits, nor the devil's grip." Tamlin's face, lit by the moon, looked sad. "I am as human as you, but I leave barely a thumbprint on the world, because I tread the ground of another. Long since, I was taken by the fairies, who stole me away from a hillside slumber and into their land. It's a wild place and strange, where the magic of the fairies corners the air like a fragrance, so that before a breath is ended, I have anything I please. There are fruits sweeter than any I've known, and sleep there is as untroubled as the flowers that bloom forever on the boughs. But the magic is my manacle. I am trapped by the magic of the fairy queen, whose heart is the empty heart of the ocean, though she says she loves me. I am allowed to love none but my queen, so I have loved no one at all. And I have met no mortal creature, save the mice and birds in these woods. I don't know how long it's been. It was maybe a single night's dreaming. It was maybe 100 years. And that's that.
Mm.
Thank you so much. And I wonder if you could just hold up some of the pages that you were reading from so we can see the illustrations as well.
Oh, sure.
It's a multimedia experience.
Okay, well, that's the page it starts on. It goes over quite a few pages. Can you see that? All right.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Amazing. And I guess we'll carry on in the order.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's yeah, the artwork is really beautiful. Thank you so much, Avon.
Thank you. It's all right.
And Gray, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm more enthusiastic when I came out there. Yeah, I read 2 wee pieces, so they are quite short. And some of them have a lot of folklore, fairy tale themes, and some don't, but I'll read some of them. So this one's called One Night with a Werewolf. I'm stepping into last night's jeans when she wakes. I try to pull them up before she notices the bite marks, but I can see in her eyes that I'm not quick enough. She looks at the splattering of bloodstains on my bed sheets, dry and more brown than red. I'm so sorry, she says. I've had such a crazy few weeks. I didn't realize it was that time of the month. I shrug. It's cool. It happens. We smile at each other with our mouths, but not our eyes. Her gaze flicks over the room, unsure where to settle. As I continue to dress, she tucks her body into itself, folds her feet underneath her, digs elbows into ribs. She tugs at the sheet until it covers the thick fur that has sprouted from her armpits, legs, and big toe. I pretend not to notice and rummage for a t-shirt. Sorry, I've got to get to work, I say. You've got someone to... I'm fine, she says. We both look at what remains of her dress, red scraps like shredded meat on the floor. The pearls of her necklace are scattered around the room, tiny lost wounds on the carpet. I grab some clothes, jeans, and an old jumper from the dresser and throw them too quickly onto the bed. Here, you can wear these. Thanks, she says, and bumps her thumb across a loose bed. I'll bring them round sometime. It's cool, I say to the dark shadow above her lip. Just keep them. I leave the flat and walk as quickly as I can away from those soft howls and kind of around the stairwell.
Mm.
These are like beautiful illustrations. I say beautiful, like kind of dark, but beautiful. Murphy Winter did the inside illustrations, which are pretty cool. So yeah, these are for these two. And so this one's called Fairy Tale Endings. I'm alone in bed. It's late, but I found a club. Follow the neon glow to the end of an alley where the words "Happy Ever After" float above an entrance with no bouncer. Inside it's busy. I'm looking around for my friends when a bar girl asks what I want. I grab a drinks menu, but it's all fuzzy jumbled, so I just point at random instead. Frog sparkle, she says, and looks at me funny. You want the kiss with it? Yeah, of course, I reply, winking like I order it all the time. I'm smiling at these girls next to me, her smiling back, and the bar girl slides my drink towards me. It's huge and colourful, as though there's a melted down circus inside and tastes just as good. It tastes so good that I chug it down, I just can't stop. But it isn't until it's nearly finished that I see the frog, limp, heavy, sliding face first down into the glass towards me. I just managed to close my mouth in time, and its lips, all cold and slick firm, collide with my own. I drop the glass. As it hits the ground, it explodes, not just glass, but as though there were fireworks inside, and for a second I see the frog amongst it all before it explodes too. Then suddenly there's this naked guy lying face down in all the bits of glass and spilled drink. I'm scouring my lips with my sleeve and dancing around, screaming, what the fuck, as the bar girl rushes round. The smiling girls are gone. Sorry, that happens sometimes, the bar girl says, and drags the lifeless man by the leg. And I'm alone again before I think to ask if I just keep them.
Thank you so much.
I think I might read a werewolf one. I have a poem about the Wolvers. Do you know what a Wolver is? Anyone not noticed? Some people don't know. So I'll just quickly explain that a Wolver is kind of Scotland's answer to a werewolf. But in Scottish folklore, it tends to be that they don't change from being a person into a wolf and back again. They're always in this kind of partly wolf, partly person kind of hairy status. And also in lots of the Scottish stories, they're quite benevolent. They're not necessarily scary, and they would particularly bring gifts for like poor people, sick people. They would leave food. They would hunt and leave what they caught for people. Sometimes they like to. So this is Love Song for a Wolver. When I was a boy, the wolver brought me fish, a wet bouquet of them, at my window. Scales gem bright in the wooden dish, gleaming, ornate as coin. Such silver teeth he had, such hair, such yellow eyes. He brought me 8 wet stones from the Loch. He brought the bones of a trout, the bottled cries of a once wise man gone mad. The wolver's courting gifts. He came to me in the grey dawn, knelt down at my door. We wed that spring. I wore the soft fur of a prey creature. His strong voice lifts the birds up to the sky, and oh, he sang that day. From everywhere around, the half-wolf's wedding sound echoed. The air was grey with his wind-roughened cry. We live together still, the wolf and his husband. We make our den atop the northernmost outcrop of this moonsick island. Listen, tonight we howl. And I'll read one more, which I feel like no collection of Scottish folklore and poems about Scottish myths and stories is complete without the Loch Ness monster. So this is my short poem for Nessie, called Nessie. The Loch Ness monster isn't a boy or a girl. Nessie doesn't have much use for words like that. Nessie's much too busy scaring fishermen and posing for blurry photos that nobody will believe in. Nessie knows who Nessie is and isn't. Nessie knows where the silverest fish swim and how to shimmy through silt like a tonga. Nessie knows what it's like to be the only one. You don't need to believe in Nessie. Your belief doesn't change who Nessie is. Under the weight of the water, under the shadow of the hills, Nessie has always existed. Not a boy or a girl, but real.
Aidan had a new poem to share with us. Was that right, Aidan?
Oh yeah, okay, I can read that.
Yeah, I didn't realise that you didn't read that.
Okay, so this is inspired by folklore, and it's called Why the Moon Changes Shape. The moon and the river were in love. The river endlessly searched, but could find no way to reach the sky. All she found were snagging rocks. The moon reached her light to the river, but found no way down. She asked the sun to make a path for her, but the sun's light was too bright and the moon couldn't bear it. She asked the trees to let her climb to the ground, but the high branches snapped under her feet. She asked the owl, but the owl spoke to her in riddles and stared. She asked the wind, but she was carried everywhere but the ground. In tears, she asked the nightingale, and the nightingale took the moon into her song and gently let her fall, drop by drop, into the river's arms. So it happens every month. When the moon leaves the sky, piece by piece, she is living on earth in the arms of the river.
Thank you. All three of you for sharing such beautiful works. It's such a treat to hear writers and poets kind of read their work aloud. I really miss that. So, thank you. You kind of touched a little bit upon this, but I wanted to start by kind of asking all three of you what drew you to folklore in general. Was there a specific story you had that just really endeared it to you? Yeah, what was the first kind of memory that you have of being like, this is fascinating and I need to know more about it? Whoever would like to start.
Me, I guess?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, sure. Oh, for as long as I can remember, I've been interested in fairy tales. I suppose it starts with reading more like European fairy tales, and then just loving the imagination of it, loving the magic of it and the endless possibility of it. And then as I grew up, I think I started reading more, branching out to global kind of folklore, and just loving the way in which it's about exploring. To me, it's about exploring mystery. It's about exploring the weirdness and the complexity of ourselves and the world, but filtering it through this intense kind of imaginative lens. And just the way in which anything's possible, nothing is impossible to question in folklore. Like, anything can happen. And I learn more from folk tales and from folklore than I think any other art form. And I love the way in which it's like it feels like, because there's no one author to it. It feels like a whole community has come together and put all their imaginations into every single story, every single idea. And so you're getting in one snapshot, like the entire community, like generations of lives in every single story. And I think it's a really powerful thing to experience.
Amazing. And was there one particular story that hooked you in?
Oh, I can't remember any particular stories now. I think it was just reading lots and lots of stories and just loving it more all the time.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Rachel, I feel like you were ready to...
I really agree with what you said about it being a community thing. I think that with folklore, one of the things I love about it is that it belongs to all of us. Nobody owns it, and so you can tell it and retell it. And they originally were told and retold. There's often not one definitive version of it. So it's not like there's this kind of sacred original text that you're changing in order to kind of to queer it or to make it your own, or to change it for your family. And I think it's different with every telling, and depending on who's telling it. So that's one of the things I really love about it. I think that's one of the things that makes it so appealing to people who want to tell their own versions of a story. So there's something in it that we recognize, but there's something also in it that's our own. I had a really interesting conversation with Michael Richardson, who was at that time at LTC in Scotland when I got the Cultural Commission to write this. We were talking about how I think a lot of queer people are drawn to what's supposed to be the villains or the monsters in fairy stories. And I think that I was definitely. So I started with Wayne, I started with the Selkie, which is my favourite. There's something about these stories of transformation where there's a secret you underneath. Especially these characters, these monsters that look human, like the changeling stories. they look human, but there's this scary to kind of most people thing, this not normal thing about them, this secret that they have. And the idea of kind of navigating that, what that would be like to be that person with like something else going on underneath your skin that you can either choose to share with people or not.
Definitely.
Mm.
Ingrid, do you have anything in that?
I mean, I'll say I think Selkie was probably one of the first folklore stories that I really kind of resonated with, and Rachel's retelling is like beautiful. It's so good. But yeah, just for the kind of reasons you said, the whole transformation aspect and yeah, what's kind of shown and having this other side underneath. I think as a trans person, I think you can't not relate to that. I think there's definitely really relatability there. Yeah, and as you're saying about the villain and how kind of like dark like folklore is sometimes, it's not always the kind of stories you're told as a kid and the kind of Disney versions of things. Now you kind of you look at it more, it's like so dark. Yeah, which I'm quite feeling there.
That's what my daughter loves about it. I remember I went to see, do you know Bop Theatre? They're like a disability theatre group. They're really good. I went to see a performance they did of the Little Tin Soldier, which has like lots of metaphors for disability and things around that. But they were talking about how one of the reasons maybe children like folk stories and fairy stories is that they don't lie to them. They're often really brutal, and that harshness and that brutality that kind of Disney try and iron out is actually what's most appealing about them. That, you know, in the story of the Little Tin Soldier, he does everything right. He's really steadfast, and yet he doesn't get that happy ending. And that's just what life is sometimes. That you can do everything right and be a good person, but the universe just kind of doesn't make that win for you. And that's a really true thing. And I think that the kids like that. They like to feel like they're being told the truth, even if it's a difficult truth.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to kind of jump off this idea of seeing yourself in kind of like the villain of the story often. And kind of what was your approach to kind of the three of you when you were sort of like, okay, the folklore stuff, I'm into this, but I'm maybe seeing myself in the people who are like the evil characters in the story. And obviously there can be some like problematic portrayals of that. And what was your kind of thought process around, I'm going to tell my own version of this, I'm gonna kind of subvert some of these tropes? Was there a specific story that you were like, if I just tweak this, or was there a specific idea that came to you when you were thinking about switching things around? I think maybe we'll go the other way, so we'll go Gray, Rachel, and Nathan.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of the otherness, with villains sometimes, and also that kind of misunderstanding, and I don't think I feel like anyone is, I mean, maybe some people, but not everyone like you're seen as bad. There's not really like a bad person. There's always reason for it, there's always something going on behind, and sometimes, it depends if a story's told in a certain way. Anyone can be made to look bad. So I think that's kind of the fun in rewriting them, especially when you go from the villain's point of view. It gives you a whole other perspective to the story. And it's just like, a chance to tell that person's side of things. I think that's been like a queer person, the story that's told about us in the media is really easy to slant in a certain way. We see that a lot. And that's true. No, it's true.
Having your own specific narrative, but those characters they're not like at the center of the story. They're sometimes on the periphery, and they're not the heroes necessarily. And so looking at those kind of characters who have maybe been sidelined by some traditional narratives, taking them from that aspect, giving them a chance.
My favorite example of a character that's kind of sidelined and is just like a minor villain in other people's stories in Scottish folklore is the 7 Big Women of Jura, who, I don't know if you've heard of them, but there's just these 7 giantesses that live on Jura, and it's just sort of known, like the hero has got to go and get something from Jura, and everyone's like, oh no, but the 7 big women, what are you going to do? And he's like, oh I know, but I've just got to go get it, and he has to fight them and get it back. And so I wrote their own version where they're this like polyamorous commune of giant lesbians. But I think it is something, the stories that aren't in Because when I'm teaching creative writing, I always tell my kids when it comes to writing villains and monsters and bad characters that everyone feels himself to be the hero of their own story. And so it's really easy to make a very two-dimensional character who's bad because they're not good. But yeah, and I think what you said about how like the stories that are told about us as queer people is often we're monsters. And so the compulsion is there to take those monsters and those villains and kind of try and work out, well, what's the truth? You know, we've got maybe the Daily Mail version of the story, but what's the true version of what's, you know, yeah. But then, as you said, there can be problems with that when, like, you don't want to be implying that being queer makes you evil. But I think that, but there's definitely something in there where we're really drawn to those characters.
Yeah, they're often more, sometimes I think, interesting than the hero who has like a very specific dynamic, and being able to exist outside of a specific dynamic just means there's more room for color within your just within the personality and within the character. You can give them some complexity and some flaws, you know.
I feel like I don't have much to add to the wonderful ideas that Gray and Rachel have just shared, but I suppose what I will say is that I think a lot of the folk stories that we've ended up with, they leave us with the impression that queer people don't exist, right? Because I think queer people have been deleted from the archives. They've been omitted from the anthologies by folklorists. And so I think a lot of the time the very openly kind of obviously queer stories, we don't hear about them. I think folklore has been full of them throughout history, but a lot of the time we don't end up hearing them. And so I do wonder the extent to which queerness in a way has ended up being expressed through folklore through the lens of the monstrous, like you've been talking about, as a way for people to explore feelings of being made to feel monstrous, and fearing queerness and viewing it as monstrous. I mean, in Tamlin, you've got this very powerful transformation sequence in which Tamlin is transformed into various beasts and hideous and terrible, frightening things. And there is a link to, firstly, there's a link to the ancient tradition of dressing up in costumes to confuse people, to confuse spirits at Samhain and things like that. But also, I feel like, for me, there's a link there with feeling perhaps like you are monstrous and having to move through that feeling of monstrousness, and with the aid of someone else who's loving you, perhaps, to transform you through your shame into a more true version of yourself, perhaps.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I kind of want to ask a little bit about process. So, you know, Gray and Rachel's books are kind of collections of lots of different folk tale retellings or folk inspired, and then obviously Avon's graphic novel is one specific retelling. And I suppose, just what was the process for all three of you? I imagine quite different process. What was the process of kind of deciding what to include, what to change, what to keep, and how did you make these your own? I suppose is what I'm asking. And maybe we'll start with Avon and go back down the way just to keep you on your toes.
Yeah. So the process, I think I wanted to change Tamlin up a lot. I didn't want it to be an ordinary, straightforward retelling, and I deliberately didn't refer to any other versions. I just used my memory of it, because I wanted to just have that freedom to bring everything I wanted to bring to it. And so I think if you know the story and you read my book, you'll realize that I think it's quite different, especially the first half of it, because Tamlin, I think, is the reason for Janet wanting to save Tamlin is very different in my version. I think I wanted to do away with all of the idea of Tamlin being sacrificed to the devil and all of this that you get in the original versions, and for it just to be about Tamlin being imprisoned by the Fairy Queen and not being able to be herself, not being able to love openly. And the only reason why Janet wants to save Tamlin is because she loves her and she wants to be with her. So I think that was very important for me to retell the story in that way and to make it, to bring more out of it that I saw in it. I saw within it a strong potential to explore queerness and to explore ideas of shame and imprisonment in lots of different ways. The ways in which we are imprisoned, even if we're out, we imprison ourselves through self-limiting ourselves and not being open in all kinds of ways. And I think Tamlin is a really powerful story about the power we have to liberate each other in lots of ways, and perhaps especially from fear and shame. And this only happens in Tamlin through that combination of Janet and Tamlin working together to not only defy the power of the Fairy Queen, but also to help Tamlin through that very difficult transformation into a state in which they can be together. So that was the central aim for me with retelling Tamlin.
Thank you, and that's so intriguing for me because this was my first encounter with the story of Tamlin, and now I'm ready to kind of go and look at the other versions. But I'm just like, the devil, like what? This is all. I have many questions, but that's I feel like starting with this kind of queering of Tamlin, I feel like I might be disappointed by some of the other versions. But, thank you, that's great. And Rachel, what about you?
As I said, I started with a lot of these stories with telling them just verbally. I do a lot of storytelling with my kids. So I started telling lots of the stories. But then when it came to put them together into a collection, I had kind of a core of the poems which I had already kind of written and I knew I wanted to include, and the characters I wanted to put in. And then it was a question of kind of looking at that with my publisher, my editor, and thinking, what's missing from this? It's kind of impossible to include everything. It's not meant to be like a definitive guide, but I sort of came at it. I wanted to include a really wide range of different kinds of people and identities in the stories. And I was trying to work out what felt natural within each story or creature or character to kind of make that work with each one. And I knew when I was writing it that I didn't want to use any of the words we think of, like lesbian, gay, transgender, asexual, any of those words, because I think even for young people, you can come to those words with a lot of baggage. When I was writing this, I was thinking a lot about a survey that LGBTYS did in, I think, 2016 of young people in Scotland, queer young people in Scotland and their experiences. And I was really, it's an interesting survey to read just the statistics of, but the comments are really fascinating. And one of the comments that stuck with me was that somebody was saying that they felt that it would be useful to have more representation, not just for LGBT young people, but for not LGBT young people, for everybody else, so that the first time they're encountering the idea of a trans person isn't that kid at school, but that's already kind of part of their world and their universe and their knowledge of the world. And so I kind of wanted to have that angle in it. So I wanted to be describing people in stories without using those words, which then made it really hard for some of them, like describing an asexual person without using the word asexual, but without making it all about the fact that they're just not having sex with anyone. It's kind of a strange thing to try and write. So yeah, I think once it got to that point, a lot of the process was just kind of trying to work out, what am I including and where are the spaces and how can that fit together?
That's great, thank you. And great.
So I think my process for a lot of these actually, I wrote a lot of these coming out of a really bad period of writer's block. I was really struggling to write, and I started taking fairy tales and folklore and mythical creatures and using that as like a starting point, because there's obviously that intimidation of a blank page, but starting with like this base, especially something that's really familiar, was nice as a way to at least start with something and have somewhere to go. So I didn't feel like I was just starting with nothing. And taking someone who's already there and like seeing, okay, what if I like twist this bit, or if I change this, or like how can I queer this story? For the process of putting this together, it didn't mean a lot of these pieces I wrote weren't very good, but like at that point, that wasn't the goal, just to start fighting against them, kind of from this to and it helped a lot. It was a really good way to get back in training, and I got like really obsessed with it. I wrote loads of stories like this. I didn't write anything else for a while, so I had a nice bag of some. I didn't know the kind of theme that ran through a lot of them was love in some form of another, like not necessarily romantic love, but platonic love or self-love or lost love and all that. I kind of put together the ones that had these different kind of love themes and try to kind of get a nice balance to what happened.
Thank you, and thank you all for you kind of sharing your process. I'm always really fascinated about what gets left on the cutting room floor and where things come from and how the final product looks compared to the initial idea. So thank you for sharing that insight. And I'm aware that time is moving apace, so I think that this is going to be my last question before we move to kind of audience questions. So get your thinking caps on now. I kind of want to end by asking all three of you why you think folklore kind of has this staying power. What do you think it is that resonates with people, and why do we kind of keep retelling the same stories, the same tropes, trying to subvert them, trying to kind of rip them up and put them back together in different ways? Like, what about folklore in particular do you think it is that appeals so much to us as humans? I'm going to start with Rachel just to mix it up.
My background is in science, and I often say that science and folklore often occupy a similar cultural space. They're stories that we tell to describe and explain the world and life and our place in it. And I think that's why they endure. Each one has something in it about the world, about the nature of life. And it doesn't have to be literally true to have that kind of some truth to it, some kind of universal truth. And I think that's what's interesting to people, and also why it keeps being retold, because that what is true, what is a universal truth, that changes as well from person to person and culture to culture. So I think that's and I think as well they just have such a great oral tradition that has just gone on and on and on. As much as we have books and we have the internet, we have all of this stuff, there's still something magical about being told a story, and I think that'll just never end. People will always want to be told a story.
I agree. Oh, that's so. I've never thought about folklore and science as being kind of the same in that way. So I'm just like, yeah, that's so true. Well, thank you for sharing that nugget of wisdom with us. And Aidan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Rachel said there. I think for me, folklore is the most human of art forms in a way. I think it has been like central to every culture in human history. I don't think it can be belittled in any way. It helps us to sort out the way in which we feel about ourselves and the way in which we interact with everyone else. Has the potential to explore every human experience, which is why I think it's so important to explore queerness through folklore, because I don't think any other art form does it like folklore and folk tales do, because you've got that lens in the way, that filter of the imaginary. I think it has such power to explore human experiences, and like I said, because we've been kind of forcibly omitted from folklore, I think we deserve to use folklore to explore queerness as one of the more common human experiences. Maybe people disagree, but I think we're in every family, we're in every community. So I think we should be in folklore. And another thing I was thinking about regarding folklore is anonymity. I mentioned this earlier, but because you've got this collective effort towards creating folklore, there's a sense of you perhaps not needing to commit yourself forever to your retelling, but in retelling folklore, you bring all of your own hopes and your own thoughts and your ideas to it, but you can then kind of detach yourself from it in a way and be anonymous, which I think is really important for queer people as well, especially because often anonymity is useful to us to be open. Like often we're more open on the internet being queer than among our own family members. And it's because of that kind of anonymity. So I think folklore is really powerful in that sense, that you can explore everything you want to explore in your own retelling of it. When you sing a folk song or retell a story, you can pour your heart into it, but you don't necessarily need to put your name on it. And I think whenever I read a folk story, like I said earlier, I think of the people who have poured their hearts into those stories hundreds of years, and we don't know their names, but we have a little piece of their soul still remaining. So I think that the pull towards folklore will never go away.
That's great, and that's such a beautiful idea as well. This idea of being connected by just cultural stories. I really love that. Okay, great. Do you have anything you add to add?
Yeah, just that thought of being connected, and it's not just like telling stories and lots of stories. It's the fact that you're connected to people like so much longer, like hundreds of years ago, and you relate to these stories, and it's these experiences and feelings that I for as long as but yeah, definitely the lack of queer representation is an important thing to look at, to rectify.
Well, thank you all three of you, and I think we're now going to move into some audience questions, both in person and virtually. So I don't know if anybody in the shop has a question, if they want to raise their hand.
If they're being shy, there's one online. So Elspeth has asked, how do the authors learn more or characterize characters that have already been created to some extent? As in, folklore characters already have some background and a history, as opposed to those created purely in your own head.
So do you want to jump in first?
I don't mind. Yeah, so I think it's just about trying to, in a way, shrug off your perception of those characters that already exist, and to meet them anew, to try to relate to them, to try to see yourself in them in some way. And I really only I'm interested in writing about characters I do relate to. So I think especially if you're bringing new ideas to it, you're retelling the story, the character kind of naturally becomes new, becomes fresh. And like I said with Tamlin, just trying to, in a way, forget about the original story and think about this character as a completely new person whom you're just meeting, and Janet as well, thinking about, because I think when the feelings of the characters change, when the motives of the characters change, then fundamentally they change as characters because their journey is different. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that.
Great, thank you. And does anyone else want to add anything to that question?
Only things that characters, like whether you want to or not, you can't help it. Like part of you and your experiences and your insecurities and all these things that things to do come out in some way in your characters. I think just by retelling, each different writer will bring something new.
Yeah.
I think one of the things about folklore is that it's not like a novel. You don't have a lot about each character necessarily. They're not incredibly well fleshed out. So they are really open to interpretation. So you can just take them in kind of, as you find them, how you would imagine them, just like that.
Yeah.
I do an exercise, because I think you were there for one of my things where I did it, where I have people draw their own eyes and then draw a character, a fairy tale creature or mythological character around that, and then turn that into a character. And the idea is that there's a part of you in the characters that you're writing.
I love that. Yeah, that's perfect. That's so great.
Mm.
Just, I want to do that exercise.
You should.
Yeah, we
It was-
did.
Yeah, we
yeah.
did it here in like where all the best
remember
things
that.
happen.
That's such a great question. I should ask that.
You want to just project?
Yeah, so it was inspired by what Rachel said earlier about folk tales often being spoken and how that you often started the idea with your children. And I was wondering for all of you, was that something you kind of kept in mind while writing and while creating these stories? Was about either when it was like when you were writing and editing, did you sort of speak them aloud, or did you think about when people were reading them, whether they would speak them aloud? Was that something you kind of thought about or worked with?
Evan, could you hear that?
Bits of it, unfortunately, not all of it.
Would you repeat
Yeah.
the question?
The question, I think the question is about kind of audience's idea of like the oral tradition of storytelling, and throughout kind of your process of writing and editing, did you speak bits aloud? Were you kind of aware of, I suppose, almost like the performance element of kind of the work? I hope that was a good summary. Thank you. I don't know if you want to jump in first.
I did think about that so much. These poems, they're totally meant to be performed, and I've been so lucky to have lovely messages from like school teachers who read it with their kids and their kids join in. So some of the poems have like a call and response element to them, particularly for that reason, or like a chorus that repeats. It was actually quite difficult because I would tell these as stories and I wouldn't tell them like as poems. I wouldn't recite like in a poem form. It would be quite different when I would tell a story to a poem which is very condensed and often quite stylized and heightened. So they are really different, and sometimes it was quite hard to translate a story into a poem because the temptation would be to try and include everything in the story in the poem, and then it's just a story that kind of maybe rhymed. But so some of them, like The Bridge of One Hair, I just took one tiny element of that story and just wrote a very small poem about it. But when I'm telling the story, that's actually quite a long, involved story with lots of different stages. But definitely like the Blue Men of the Minch poem. So the Blue Men of the Minch are kind of like sirens. They're storm spirits that would live in the sea in the Minch, and they would try and sink the ships. But the captain of the ship, if he was quite quick-witted, the Blue Man would say a couple of lines of poetry to him, and if the captain could think of a good retort, a good couple of lines to answer back, then they might be allowed to pass. And so I wrote the entire thing in couplets that were from the two different voices with the idea. And whenever I perform that, I've always asked somebody to read it with me because it doesn't feel right to read it as one person. So yeah, I think about that a lot with this book more than any of people. I think especially for young people, reading poems aloud is so important. And like even at the teenage level, I don't want it to be like this dry, dusty thing that's on the page and then you have to write down what it means line by line, but like to be something that's performed and told like a story.
Yeah. Great, Ethan.
That's a really interesting question because I think when I was writing this, I'd kind of just before then been like absolutely terrified of the thought of reading anything aloud in front of anyone, and this was very kind of pivotal moment where I was trying to find a bit more confidence as a writer, and starting to do like open mic nights and things, and some of these pieces were some of the ones I actually did read aloud for the first time, and previous to that I was very much, I felt safer hiding behind the page, just reading, and not being in a room with real people. But I then realized actually that is a really lovely, amazing experience, and it's such a different way to share your work because you get the response like immediately. It's right there, you can see on people's faces how something goes down or doesn't. Yeah, I know it's something really lovely about orally sharing something you've created with a room full of strangers, although terrifying. So yes, some of these pieces in here were definitely written with performance in mind, and some of them I think were kind of from slightly earlier without that. I've never really considered that before. So yeah, that's a really interesting thing to think about. I'm gonna have to like look through this again and think about that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And April,
Yeah, I absolutely thought very much about what the poetry sounds like when read aloud. I think there's often a temptation with poetry, especially if you're not writing it with the intention of reading it, as I wasn't, to forget about how it sounds. But I've always had as my practice as a poet to read everything aloud and to read other people's poems aloud as much as possible, because I think it's the only way you can develop your ear, in a way, develop that sense of how things sound on the page in the mind, to develop the rhythm and the stress, because things can change dramatically when you read them aloud. And always aware of that oral tradition that you were talking about with regard to folklore, being aware of the fact that I was adapting not just a story, but a ballad in particular, which, of course, like all folklore, it's meant to be shared with the community, but perhaps especially a ballad, because there's that very strong sense of a community focus and it being something that everyone's participating in and hearing. And I even though I was writing free verse, I wanted it to be connected in some way to that tradition. So there are a couple of moments in the poem where it moves into a more metrical kind of form. In the middle, it moves into a sort of Shakespearean form, because I was kind of trying to heighten it and kind of reference the way Shakespeare would move into meter in his plays when he wanted it to be more heightened and romantic. And again, that's all oral poetry, you know, everything that Shakespeare wrote. And then towards the end, when the fairy queen speaks, she speaks purely in rhyming meter, because I wanted it to be like, if the fairies talk, then I would imagine that they would probably speak in like rhyming meter, because that's what folk poetry is always like. So I wanted to reference that as much as I could.
thank you so much. It's just, yeah, I think it's so great to hear kind of all the performance and the conversation. And we're at the time, and sadly we have to bring our conversation to a close. So I just want to end by thanking our speakers, thanking Lighthouse Books, thanking Night Out Press and Book Week Scotland for this amazing event. I've had so much fun, and I really wish we could just carry on this conversation because I have so many more questions. But if we can just give a round of applause to our speakers.